Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So in our last deep dive, we really got into the technical stuff, remember? Building secure systems and application cloud security, lots of nuts and bolts. But today, we're kind of zooming out. We're looking at the big picture: risk, governance, and compliance, GRC, as it's often called. And, it strikes me that having all the best tech security is a bit like having an army with great weapons, but no generals, no battle plan, no rules. GRC is that strategy layer, that command structure.
That's a great analogy, yeah. GRC really is let's say, the guiding intelligence behind security. It's the framework that helps an organization manage risk effectively, direct where the security effort should actually go, and importantly, make sure it's meeting all its legal and ethical duties. So yeah, we're definitely shifting gears today from the purely tactical, the tools and techniques, to the more strategic thinking. And this is absolutely critical for any organization now, especially, say, Canadian organizations handling sensitive public data, or anyone operating globally, is just fundamental for, long-term success and keeping public trust.
Right. So for you listening, what we want you to get out of this is a really clear grasp of thinking in terms of risk. We'll look at key governance frameworks, the blueprints, basically. We'll touch on some major regulations, the practical side of compliance, and even wade into some of those tricky ethical questions. We'll use our usual Q&A format to break it all down. Okay, let's unpack this first big idea. When we talk about cybersecurity, from that strategic view, it becomes pretty clear, pretty fast, that you just can't eliminate every single threat out there. It's just not feasible. So if that's the case, what is the core focus? What do organizations really need to manage?
Yeah, that's the fundamental insight, isn't it? You can't boil the ocean. You can't stop every attack. The core concept, the thing you can manage, is risk. And risk, simply put, is the potential for loss or damage, right? It happens when some kind of threat takes advantage of a vulnerability you have. So managing it isn't just reacting when something bad happens. It's about having a formal process, a structured way of thinking. It really boils down to 3 key steps. First is risk identification. This means systematically figuring out, okay, what are our valuable assets? And that's broad data, sure, but also systems, reputation, intellectual property, all of it. Then, what are the threats? Cyber criminals, maybe insider threats, state-sponsored groups, accidents even. And finally, where are we vulnerable? Unpatched software, lack of multi-factor authentication, maybe just poor employee awareness. You need to list it all out.
Okay, that makes sense. Cataloging everything: assets, threats, vulnerability.
Exactly. Step 1 is just getting that inventory.
So once we have that list, once we know what could potentially go wrong, well, how do we evaluate those risks? It can't just be a long list of scary things, right? There must be a way to prioritize.
Absolutely. Just having the list isn't enough. That's where risk assessment comes in. This is step 2. And here, you evaluate each risk you identified based on essentially 2 main factors. First, likelihood. How likely is this specific threat exploiting this specific vulnerability to actually happen? Is it something that happens daily, weekly, or is it, a once-in-a-decade kind of event? Second, impact. If it does happen, how bad is it going to be? And again, impact isn't just dollars and cents. It's reputational damage, which can be huge. It's operational disruption. Can we still do business? It's legal fallout. You need to consider all angles.
Right. Likelihood times impact, basically.
That's the classic way to think about it, yeah. You multiply those factors, maybe using a scale, like low, medium, high, or numbers 1 to 5. And doing that lets you prioritize. You can plot them on a grid, a risk matrix. The risks that end up in that top right corner, high likelihood, high impact, those are your biggest dangers. Those are the ones demanding immediate attention and resources. It's all about making informed decisions on where to focus your limited time, money, and people. You tackle the biggest fires first.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Focus the resources where the danger is greatest.
Okay,
so we've identified the risks, we've assessed them, we know which ones are the big worries. Now the big question: what do we actually do about them? What are the main strategies? How do we mitigate?
Good question. Once you've assessed, you need a plan of action. And generally, there are 4 primary strategies for dealing with a risk, sometimes called risk treatment options. First, you can choose to accept the risk. This sounds passive, but it's a conscious decision. For risks that are very low impact and maybe very low likelihood, the cost and effort to actually fix them might be way more than the potential damage. So you formally acknowledge it and decide to live with it.
Okay, so if it's trivial, maybe don't spend a fortune fixing it.
Precisely. The second option is avoid. This means you decide the risk is just too high, period. So you stop the activity that creates the risk. Maybe you decide not to collect a certain type of super sensitive personal data because the risk of storing it is just too great for your organization. You avoid the risk by avoiding the activity.
Get out of that line of business, essentially.
In a way, yeah, or just change the process fundamentally. Third strategy is transfer. Here, you shift the risk, or at least the financial impact of it, to a third party. The classic, most common example is buying cybersecurity insurance. If you have a breach, the insurance covers some or all of the financial cost. You've transferred that financial risk.
Like insurance for a car accident. You transfer the cost.
Exactly the same principle. And the fourth strategy, which is probably the most common one in cybersecurity, is mitigate, or sometimes called remediate. This is where you actively implement security controls to reduce the risk. You might implement firewalls, encryption, stronger authentication like MFA, maybe improve employee training. The goal here is to reduce either the likelihood of the bad thing happening or to reduce the impact if it does happen, or ideally both.
So accept, avoid, transfer, or mitigate. Those are the four main choices.
Those are the big four, yes. You choose the best strategy based on the risk itself, your organization's risk appetite, and of course, the cost versus benefit.
That framework for thinking about risk is really helpful. Now, you mentioned implementing controls for mitigation. Organizations don't have to just invent all these controls out of thin air, do they? That sounds daunting. You mentioned blueprints earlier. Let's talk about one of the big ones. What is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework? You hear NIST CSF mentioned a lot.
Right, and it's a huge relief for organizations that they don't need to start from scratch. The NIST CSF is probably one of the most popular and widely adopted frameworks out there globally. It was developed by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, that's NIST. The key things to know about it are it's voluntary. It's not a law or a regulation you have to follow unless maybe a contract requires it. And it provides a high-level, very flexible structure. It's not overly prescriptive. It's organized around 5 core functions. Think of them as the pillars of a solid cybersecurity program. What makes it so popular is its adaptability. It works for huge multinational corporations, but also for small businesses across different sectors. It gives you a common language and a structure to think about security.
5 core functions, you said. That sounds like the heart of it. Can you walk us through what those 5 functions actually are? What do they cover?
Sure. These 5 functions really provide a complete life cycle view of managing cybersecurity risk. They are: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So first, identify. This is all about understanding your organization's context. What assets do you have? Systems, data, capabilities? What's your business environment? What are the relevant regulations? What's your overall risk strategy? It's basically the foundation, knowing yourself and the risks you face.
Okay, understand the landscape first.
Right.
Makes sense.
Exactly. Then comes protect. This is about implementing the safeguards needed to deliver your critical services. This includes things like access control, who can access what, awareness and training for employees, data security measures like encryption, processes to protect information, maintenance of systems. It's the preventative stuff.
Building the defenses.
Right. Third is detect. You've built defenses, but you need to know if they're breached. So, detect is about having the activities in place to identify cybersecurity events when they happen. This involves monitoring for anomalies, looking for suspicious events, having security continuous monitoring tools and processes, and effective detection methods. You need to spot the trouble quickly.
So finding the needle in the haystack.
Kinda, yeah. Finding the malicious activity amidst all the normal noise. Fourth is respond. Okay, you've detected something bad. Now what? Respond covers the activities to take action once an incident is detected. This means having a response plan ready to go. How do you communicate internally and externally? How do you analyze the incident to understand what happened? How do you mitigate the immediate damage? And crucially, how do you improve your defenses based on what you learned?
Learning from mistakes, essentially.
Absolutely critical. And finally, fifth is recover. This function focuses on resilience. It's about having plans to restore any capabilities or services that were impaired because of the incident. It includes detailed recovery planning, making improvements to those plans based on tests or actual incidents, and managing communications during the recovery phase until you're back to normal operations.
Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. It really covers the whole life cycle, doesn't it? From understanding the risk all the way to getting back on your feet after an incident.
It does. It provides that holistic view, encouraging a continuous cycle of improvement. It's not just a checklist. It's a way to structure your thinking in your program.
NIST CSF sounds like a really powerful, flexible guide. But as you hinted, it's not the only game in town. How does something like, say, ISO/IEC 27001 compare? Where do they differ? Is one better than the other?
That's a really important comparison. ISO/IEC 27001 is another major player, but it's different in a key way. ISO 27001 is a formal international standard for an information security management system, an ISMS. The biggest difference from the NIST CSF is that ISO 27001 is certifiable. An organization can actually hire an accredited independent auditor, go through a formal audit process, and if they meet all the requirements, they become officially certified as ISO 27001 compliant.
So you get a formal certificate, like proof.
Exactly, you get that formal attestation. And the certification is often a requirement in certain situations. Maybe you need it to win a contract, especially with government or large international partners. Or it might be expected in certain industries or countries. It demonstrates a very specific, audited level of security maturity.
So NIST is more guidance. ISO is a standard you can get certified against.
That's a good way to summarize it. NIST is guidance, flexible, voluntary. ISO 27001 is a formal standard, more prescriptive in terms of setting up the management system and leads to certification. And just briefly, you might also hear about COBIT. That's another framework, but it tends to focus more broadly on IT governance, aligning IT processes, including security, with overall business goals. It helps answer the question, how does our IT and security support the business?
So the choice really depends on what the organization needs, maybe regulatory pressure or customer demands.
Precisely. Do you need flexible guidance? NIST. Do you need formal certification? ISO. Or do you need to focus on aligning IT with business strategy? COBIT. Often organizations use elements from multiple frameworks.
Okay, that clarifies the framework landscape a bit. Frameworks provide guidance, best practices, maybe certification paths. But then there are regulations, which sound, well, stricter. What exactly are regulations in this context? And crucially, what happens if an organization doesn't follow them?
Yeah, regulations are a different beast altogether. They aren't optional guidance or best practices. Regulations are legally binding rules. They are laws set by governments or regulatory bodies that organizations absolutely must follow. No ifs, ands, or buts. And the consequences for noncompliance, they can be severe. We're talking significant financial penalties, fines that can run into the millions, or even in some cases, a percentage of global revenue, which can be enormous.
Wow, millions of percentage revenue. That's serious.
Very serious. Plus, there can be legal action, lawsuits from affected individuals, or government enforcement actions. It can also lead to mandatory audits, operational restrictions, and of course, massive reputational damage. So yeah, failing to follow regulations is not something organizations can afford to do. It hits the bottom line and can even threaten the organization's existence.
Okay, regulations clearly have teeth. Can you give us a prime example, maybe a major international regulation that's really had a global impact, especially concerning data?
The most prominent example, the one that really changed the game globally, has to be GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. It was enacted by the European Union, coming into effect in 2018. Its core purpose is to protect the fundamental data privacy rights of all EU citizens. It gives individuals significant control over their personal data.
But it's an EU regulation, right? How does it impact companies outside Europe, like here in Canada or in the US?
That's the key thing. It's global reach. GDPR applies to any organization anywhere in the world if it processes the personal data of people who are in the EU. So if a Canadian company has customers in France or Germany, or even just website visitors from the EU, GDPR likely applies to how they handle that data. It has very strict rules about getting consent, people's rights to access and delete their data, mandatory notifications if there's a data breach, and much more.
So it effectively sets a global standard, even if it's technically EU law.
In many ways, yes. Because so many companies operate globally or interact with EU residents, GDPR has become a de facto baseline for privacy practices worldwide. Many other countries have even updated their own laws inspired by GDPR principles.
Okay, GDPR is a big one from governments. But you also mentioned industry standards earlier that kind of act like regulations. Can you tell us about PCI-DSS? What's that about?
Right. PCI-DSS is a perfect example of a non-government standard that carries enormous weight. It stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. First key point, it's not a law. It wasn't passed by any government. Instead, it's a security standard that was created and is mandated by the major credit card brands. Think Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, JCB.
mandated by the credit card companies themselves.
Exactly. And it applies to any organization, regardless of size or location, that accepts, processes, stores, or transmits credit card information. If you touch cardholder data, PCI-DSS applies to you.
So pretty much any business that takes credit cards online or in person.
Pretty much, yeah. And compliance isn't optional if you want to keep taking those cards. Compliance is enforced through audits, sometimes self-assessments for smaller merchants, but often formal audits by qualified security assessors, QSAs. And the penalties for non-compliance can include significant fines levied by the card brands, but the biggest threat is that they can revoke your ability to process credit card payments.
Wow. So they could literally shut down a core part of your business.
They absolutely can. For many businesses, losing the ability to take credit cards would be catastrophic. So while PCI-DSS isn't technically a law, the consequences of ignoring it are often just as severe, making compliance essential.
Okay, so we have frameworks for guidance, regulations as mandatory rules, and industry standards like PCI-DSS that are practically mandatory. The goal for organizations facing all this is compliance. What does that term compliance really mean in practice? And how have companies traditionally tackled it, especially when preparing for, say, an audit?
Compliance, fundamentally, means proving you're following the rules. It's the process of demonstrating that your organization is adhering to the specific requirements laid out in a particular framework, regulation, or standard. Traditionally, getting ready for a formal audit that inspection, usually by an independent third party, has been pretty major effort, a big project.
Scramble, maybe.
Often, yeah. A bit of a scramble before the auditors show up. It typically involves three main activities. One, documentation, making sure you have clear, well-written security policies and procedures that actually cover the requirements of the standard you're being audited against. Everything needs to be documented. Two, evidence collection. This is the really time-consuming part. You have to gather proof that you're actually following those documented policies. This means collecting system logs, reports, change management records, training records, access reviews, tangible evidence.
So not just saying you do it, but proving you did it.
Exactly. Proof is everything in an audit. And three, gap analysis. Ideally, before the auditors arrive, you do your own assessment. Compare your current controls and practices against the standard's requirements, find any gaps or weaknesses, and try to fix them beforehand.
Sort of a pre-audit audit.
Pretty much. So yeah, traditionally it was this big, often manual, point-in-time effort, usually done annually or whenever an audit was scheduled. Lots of spreadsheets, lots of chasing people for evidence.
That does sound like a massive, stressful undertaking, especially doing it year after year. Is there a better way, a more modern approach to handling compliance?
Thankfully, yes. The approach has evolved significantly, moving towards what's called continuous compliance. The idea here is to shift away from that periodic, frantic scramble towards an ongoing automated process. It involves using specialized GRC tools and other security technologies to constantly monitor your security controls, configurations, and activities against the required standards.
Constantly monitoring, how does that work?
Well, these tools can automatically check if systems are configured correctly according to policy, if patches are applied, if access controls are appropriate, if security logs are being collected, and so on. They compare the actual state against the required state in near real time. So instead of waiting for an annual audit to find problems, you get alerts and visibility into potential compliance gaps as they happen or even before they happen.
Ah, so it's like having a dashboard showing your compliance status all the time.
That's a great way to put it. It turns compliance from a snapshot taken once a year into a continuous video feed or a real-time dashboard. The huge benefit is that you can address issues proactively throughout the year. It makes audit preparation much, much simpler because the evidence is being collected automatically and you have ongoing assurance that you're meeting the requirements. It's far less stressful and much more effective.
Continuous compliance. That sounds like a much smarter, more integrated way to operate. Okay, we've covered risk, governance frameworks, regulations, compliance, a lot of the structural and legal pieces. But cybersecurity isn't just about rules and tech. It often throws up some really complex ethical questions, doesn't it? What's a classic ethical tension that professionals in this field constantly have to grapple with?
Oh, absolutely. The ethical dimension is huge and often overlooked. One of the most fundamental classic ethical tensions is the balancing act between privacy and security. You see, to do their jobs effectively, to detect threats, investigate incidents, prevent data loss, security teams often need to monitor things: network traffic, employee emails or file access, system activity logs.
Monitoring employees. That sounds tricky.
It is incredibly tricky. because that necessary monitoring can easily slide into intrusive surveillance that violates the reasonable expectation of privacy that employees and sometimes customers have. Think about tools designed to detect insider threats, user and entity behavior analytics, or UEBA. They profile normal behavior and flag anomalies. On one hand, they can catch someone stealing data. On the other hand, they involve deep monitoring of user actions. If not implemented transparently and ethically, they can create a culture of distrust and feel like Big Brother is watching.
So how do you find the balance?
That's the core ethical challenge. It's about proportionality and transparency. You aim to implement the minimum level of monitoring required to achieve the specific, legitimate security objective. You don't monitor more than you absolutely need to. And crucially, you need to be transparent with people about what is being monitored, why it's being monitored, and how that data is being used and protected. Finding that balance effective security without needless intrusion is a constant ethical negotiation.
Privacy versus security, a really tough balancing act. What about other ethical scenarios? Say, a security researcher, maybe an independent white hat hacker, finds a serious flaw in a company's software or product. What's the ethical way for them to report it?
That's another classic ethical dilemma with real-world consequences. The widely accepted ethical approach in the security community is responsible disclosure, sometimes called coordinated vulnerability disclosure. The process works like this. The researcher finds the flaw, but instead of immediately publishing it online for everyone, including criminals, to see...
This cause chaos, right?
Exactly. It could lead to widespread exploitation before users can protect themselves. So under responsible disclosure, the researcher privately reports the vulnerability directly to the vendor, the company that makes the product. They provide the technical details and give the vendor a reasonable period of time. This is often negotiated, but typically something like 30, 60, or maybe 90 days to develop a patch or a fix and release it to their users.
So give the company a chance to fix it first.
Right. Only after that period has passed, or after a patch is available, does the researcher typically make the details of the vulnerability public. The rationale is that this approach best protects the end users. It ensures a fix is available, or soon will be, before the vulnerability becomes widely known and easily exploitable by malicious actors. While immediate public disclosure might seem transparent, the consensus is that responsible disclosure minimizes harm.
That makes sense. It's about protecting the users, ultimately.
It is. It requires collaboration and trust between researchers and vendors, even though that relationship can sometimes be tense, but it's generally seen as the most ethical path.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground today. Really valuable insights from the strategic necessity of risk management through frameworks like NIST and ISO, the teeth of regulations like GDPR, the practicalities of continuous compliance, and these really important ethical dimensions. To try and wrap this all up, if you had to summarize, what are the absolute must-haves, the critical requirements for an organization to claim it has a truly mature cybersecurity program?
That's a great summarizing question. I think a truly mature program really transcends just being a technical function. It has to be woven into the fabric of the business strategy. So first, it absolutely requires that fundamental shift to thinking in terms of risk. Not just reacting to incidents, but having a systematic, repeatable process to identify, assess, and mitigate risks proactively. That's non-negotiable. Second, leveraging established governance frameworks like NIST CSF or ISO 27001 is crucial. They provide the essential blueprint, the structure, the common language you need. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Third, you must understand and adhere to the mandatory regulations that apply to you, whether it's GDPR, PCI-DSS, or industry-specific rules. These are the legal table stakes.
Ignorance isn't an excuse there.
Definitely not. Fourth, achieving and maintaining compliance needs to be seen as a continuous process, ideally automated, not just a yearly fire drill. Continuous compliance provides real assurance. And finally, underpinning all of this, a mature program must grapple honestly with the ethical dilemmas. Balancing privacy and security, handling disclosure responsibly, using powerful security tools ethically, these require an unwavering ethical compass. So it's really a combination: strategic risk focus, structured governance, legal adherence, continuous improvement, and a strong ethical foundation. It's way more than just firewalls and antivirus.
It really paints a picture of cybersecurity as a core business discipline, not just an IP problem. Needs strategic thinking, continuous effort, and that ethical awareness. That brings us to the end of another, I think, incredibly insightful deep dive. We've definitely journeyed from the technical trenches we explored last time to the strategic heights of GRC today. It highlights just how vital these principles are for literally every organization now.
Absolutely. And remember, getting GRC right isn't just about dodging fines or checking boxes. It's fundamentally about building and maintaining trust with your customers, your partners, your employees. It's about ensuring resilience so the business can weather storms, and ultimately fostering sustainable success in what's only going to become a more complex digital world.
Well said. A huge thank you for joining us today and sharing those insights. And definitely join us next time. We'll be diving into the cyber battlefield, incident response, and threat hunting. That's where we'll look at exactly what happens when prevention fails, how organizations respond to incidents in real time, and how they proactively hunt for hidden threats within their networks. Should be exciting. Thank you again for tuning in to this deep dive. If you found this discussion valuable, and if you want to keep expanding your knowledge in computer science, AI, computer networks, and all things tech, please do remember to subscribe to our channel, Tech AI and Beyond. We appreciate your support.